Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to rise briefly on this act and say a few words. I think most has been said, but I was struck by the minister's introduction of this bill. In the introduction to the bill, the minister noted that he wanted to stop the vicious cycle that we're in. And the vicious cycle is that we're paying more and more for power. But the nature of a cycle is that it needs a systemic intervention to break it. And this is exactly the opposite. This bill is exactly the opposite. It's an 11th hour reactive Band-Aid that will provide some measure of relief for Nova Scotians. And I want to be clear that that's really important, because that's what we've talked about all session. That's what we spend all of our days doing, is looking for some measure of relief for Nova Scotians, because they certainly need it. But the change in this bill is not the change that is required. It is maybe necessary. It is not at all sufficient. And Mr. Speaker, we have been putting forward solutions for months and months and months and months since this government took office of how this government could in fact stop this vicious cycle. And they have fallen on deaf ears. And it's not just us. In law amendments, in editorials, yesterday at the pub where Sue and I had lunch, experts, we did not have a beer, experts present information to us that is really germane to this about different models of regulation, things that are pretty boring to 99% of people, but that are really, really important for our government to pay attention to. So energy regulation, rate design, efficiency, the systemic interventions we need to make so that Nova Scotians know that they can afford their power bills. And as we discussed this morning in question period, there are a lot of Nova Scotians right now who do not know whether their homes will be warm this winter. And that is a terrifying thing to contemplate. And so, Mr. Speaker, the other note that I want to sound, based on the way in which this bill was presented, was the idea, I want to refute the idea that this government respects the role of the UARB. Because we are at the end of a hearing. We are at the end of a hearing of an independent body. The government said themselves, we are going to intervene. Well, I was there when the government intervened. They didn't say much. Yeah. And so they intervened. They stood up here day after day after day and said, we need the independent process to go forward. We need to understand what the regulators are going to do. We need to hear. Nova Scotians need to have their say. And then they cut the legs right out from under it. Now, it is likely that given the parameters that they had to make a decision, that the decision that the UARB made on the rate increase would have been unsatisfactory. It would have been a rate increase that Nova Scotians could not afford. And there may have been action required at that point if it hadn't have been taken already. But I reluctantly need to say that, again, while this reduction is something, it won't be enough for many. People's power bills are still going to skyrocket because of the cost of fuel. We still haven't seen an indexing of the heating assistance rebate programs that would allow people to accommodate this increase. We haven't seen the introduction of a low-income power program, which would allow people to afford power regardless of their income. And so this bill may be too little too late. It may provide some measure of comfort to some people, but it's not enough, and it's not the right kind of intervention we need to break the cycle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.